Greetings, YouTube. There was a fundraiser I actually linked to not here long ago, and one of the things in it was a game called Starjammer. Now, I actually own Starjammer in the physical copy of it, but then I had an access to a digital copy, which is far more convenient because I can carry it anywhere I want to. And Starjammer was another version of space fantasy, where they were fusing the classic D&D, or in this case Pathfinder, with science fiction. So you've got those two being married together. In fact, it's available both in a Pathfinder and a Starfinder version, which is a little weird to me because Spelljammer is a setting, but it's also that it's a space fantasy game, and it's on its own standing. So it's kind of like you're taking Spelljammer and Starfinder, and they're kind of doing the same thing, but they're just doing it in different flavors. And if they want to cross-pollinate spell Starjammer with Starfinder, go ahead and do it. Now, originally, Starjammer was going to be called Starfinder, and then Pathfinder said, hey, we were about to launch a game called that. Could you name it something else? So they picked Starjammer, which makes perfect sense because it plays off of Spelljammer, which is also a science fantasy game, though it's far more in the high fantasy range because it never really got out of the Age of Sail vibe, though there was a bit of a biotech thing in there with some of the aberrations that had their own vessels and things like that, the mind flayers and things like that. What the little wormy dudes with the spider legs called? They had a name that started with an N. I can't remember what it is now. But they were also supposed to be weird and freaky. So Starjammer, to me, hit the sweet spot of a science fantasy game that really nailed what I wanted in a game. Because it harkened back to, at least to me, to Dragonstar, a game that came out back in the 3.5 era, which was a science fantasy game, and it presented multiple hardcover books as well as digital copies, and I believe I have some of those on my phone as well. Dealt with a game that fused classic Dungeons and Dragons with science fiction and brought them completely together. And that same era, we also ended up with Factory and Arsenal, which were also science fantasy supplements. They were not related to Dragonstar, but they came out at about the same time. And I personally think that both Arsenal and Factory are incredibly good products. I don't know if they're available digitally or not. I don't remember. But they're incredible books. I own the hard copies of them. Very much worth your time, even though they have dated a little. But reading Starjammer again, I had read it when it was hardcover came out. Then I gave it a reread as a digital copy just because why can't I can do what I want to. No, you're not my real father. It really made me think of how much I loved the Dragonstar setting. Now, I never got a chance to use it. I was in the process of using it. I was building up to that when the campaign fell apart. So I never got to launch it because I was going to have the Dragonstar Empire invade the planet that the characters are on. I was going to invade the Forgotten Realms. And literally have the Empire, the bad guys, just drop on them. Now, my biggest critique of the Dragonstar setting was the way they had it set up politically. Now, the idea is that in the far future, this space fantasy setting, it's got nothing to do with any other setting. This is its own thing. In the far future, the dragons finally got together and said, we've been battling each other for millennia now, and it's laying waste to planets' entire systems. We got to find a better way of doing this. So they decide to come up with the idea that they will take turns with each house of dragons being in charge of the empire. I think it was for 5,000 years at a shot. And for some strange reason, they allowed all of the metallic houses to come back to back, and then all of the chromatic houses to go back to back, so that you would have 25,000 years of rulership under the chromatic dragons. Now, I ask you, as a mortal, would you want to live in an empire run by red dragons and their minions, because let's face it, the red dragons are going to be the power behind the thrones of all of them. No, you would not. Now, they did set up a system of laws that said that you could only prosecute someone for things that they did that broke the law, which I thought was nice. So even if you cast, no alignment on a person and they were screamingly chaotic evil, you couldn't kill them or you couldn't arrest them just because they said they detected as chaotic evil. They have to break the law and you have to prove it in court. So, which would be a lot easier in a world with, high fantasy magic. It's much easier to pull that off when you can, do things that we can't do in our mortal realm. In our mortal realm, lie detectors are complete and absolute bull. Do not ever get involved in one. They tell you nothing. But in high fantasy games, you can have spells that tell you the truth, and they are absolutely reliable. So that was the idea, at least. Why they did that, I don't know. I thought it was dumb. If I were going to set up that system, and I wouldn't, we're going to get to what I'm going to do. It's going to be a long-ass video, and I apologize. As I would have set it up so that it was 1,000 years of reign. 1,000-year reign. So less than the life cycle of a single dragon, which means each one would have probably just 1 or 2 leaders for that particular reign of that house. And I'd have them go chromatic, metallic, chromatic, metallic. And that way, you let the chromatics go first. You can start to repair the damage that the chromatics did. And then you create new laws that will help prevent the next chromatic house from doing the damage that the last chromatic house did. So over time, if you do it right, you can ramp up the law structure. So you're slowly disempowering the chromatic dragons until the point they are not a danger. Yes, it would take a long time, but you could do it. That's how I would use it if I had to be forced into that Dragonstar narrative of the houses had to switch over, and this is the agreement they came to. That's what isn't how I want to run a Dragonstar campaign, or in this case, since this is Starjammer's Pathfinder, how would I run a Starjammer game? Now, I always wanted a Pathfinder version of Dragonstar. So much did I want this. As soon as Pathfinder came out, I read it and I'm like, I want a Starjammer. I want a Dragonstar version of this. And it never happened. Until now. Now we have Starjammer, which is a Pathfinder version of Dragonstar. And it is really damn cool. So how would I set it up? So imagine for a second, we're going to back up. So you got your kind of a classic high fantasy setting. No science fiction yet. And, it's the classic where the dragons are fighting each other, and, bad dragons are like taking on villages or towns, and maybe they have conquered a country. But it's all on a planetary scale, and everything's taking place on that planet. Well, as they begin to expand beyond that, as the technology begins to fuse with magic, and you begin to, your planets become political units unto themselves within a system, the damage done by those chromatic dragons is beginning to get larger and larger. So now they're not just a danger to a town or a city or maybe a nation. Now they're a danger to an entire planet, potentially to an entire system. And because the metallic dragons are wise, they can see that very shortly they're going to become dangerous to like entire spiral arms of galaxies. So we need to do something, and we need to do it now. So the metallic dragons get together, very clandestine, very quiet, and they come together and they realize we need to create a functioning government. And that means we're going to go to war with the chromatic dragons, and it's going to be on an interstellar scale. But they prepare. And the metallic dragons have one ace up the sleeve that the chromatic dragons will never have. What is that? Cooperation. The metallic dragons will cooperate with each other in a way that the chromatic dragons never will. So one day, the metallic dragons will roll up and they say, "Okay, We are now the Dragon Empire. We are taking over these systems right here. We are now imposing a constitutional monarchy. We are going to be at the top tier. There will be 2 houses of representatives, one which will be of the royals. That way they get all the other species on board, because they're not tipping the lifeboat a whole lot. They're letting the royals remain their power, but now they have to be elected to office. And a lower house, which is non-royals. Though you could still have nobles. There's a difference between a noble and a royal. It's easier to become a noble than it is to become a royal. Pretty much you have to be born into it or married into becoming a royal, but you can become a noble on your own. And so they have checks and balancing system, and while the dragons are at the top of this heap, they are a constitutional monarchy. Now imagine the chromatic dragons are not happy about this, because suddenly now they're facing a united front. And let's face it, all those metallic dragons and all of their allies are now facing the disparate little squabbling zones controlled by different dragons, even though some of those zones are pretty big. A system, maybe a couple of systems under the control under one house, or maybe even under the control of one chromatic dragon. So the chromatic dragons get together and they're like, well, they've got the dragon. Actually, we're going to call it the Dragon Republic. Sorry, they've got the Dragon Republic. We have to do something. So the chromatic dragons get together and say, we're going to become the Empire Draconis. Okay, so they're the Empire and they have a Republic. So yeah, I'm doing Star Wars here. And they go to war. But again, they can't cooperate. That's why the Empire and Star Wars can't work either. If you've been watching the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, like I have been doing at the time of this recording, it's still rolling out. There's a lot of bickering between the people in charge, and they'll kill each other. Dragons are no different. So even if you can get them all to come together for one united purpose, it's never going to last. I looked at the Nazi regime. There were different parts of the Nazi regime all trying to vie for the attention of Hitler, at competition with each other. It left a very chaotic structure because everybody wanted his approval. And the system, even if he had achieved a certain amount of control and established himself as, legitimate leader of these territories, it wouldn't have lasted. It would have fallen apart because of that internecine squabbling. And the same thing happens to the Empire Draconis. Yes, they make some gains because they are willing to use warfare styles that the metallics are not. The chromatic dragons will be far more brutal. They will lay waste to an entire planet, just like the Empire in Star Wars is, to get their point across. You will do what we say, or you're next. Okay, so they can make some good initial gains, but they can't hold it together long term, and eventually the metallic dragons win. The Empire Draconis is shattered. There are little bits and pieces of it out there, all probably still squabbling about who's actually in charge of it, and they'd probably be doing this for millennia to come. And the Dragon Republic, they become the de facto leadership of the zone that they had started. So it's not the entire galaxy. We're just going to talk on the galactic level here, but it's a chunk of the galaxy. Okay? And they begin to try to expand their sphere of influence to protect other systems and bring them into the Republic and keep them safe from the trepidations of both the chromatic dragons as well as other intergalactic dangers like the Niati. Is that what they're called? Might have been the Niati, or the mind flayers and things like that, or the Aboleth, who may be out in space as well as beneath the ocean. So there are a lot of threats out there, and the Dragon Republic is offering people protection from them and rolling you into a constitutional monarchy, which is a better system of government than probably lots of them have ever had before, because lots of them are coming from the traditions of conventional medieval structures, which there are not a lot of rights under medieval structures. The Dragon Republic is offering them a much better deal, and it still allows the royals to have a certain slice of the pie, because the royals realize, well, this Republic shows up, and they're offering our people this really good deal. If we don't get on board, our people are just going to hang us in the street by our own entrails. So they begin to get larger. Okay, so what happens? What happens here is the evil dragons need to get controls of systems, even if it's just for the purposes of raiding, but they can get a control of a system and try to become a legitimate government, but they have to do it before the Dragon Republic gets there. So the evil dragons, the chromatic dragons, are out there on the frontier. And unfortunately, they are sometimes the first dragons systems encounter. And their forces are sometimes the first intergalactic, interstellar rather, not intergalactic, interstellar forces that are, culture that they've ever encountered, which is not a good thing. And behind them comes the Dragon Republic trying to catch up, trying to undo the damage they've done, and the evil dragons have to keep going further out. So they become the explorers. They become sometimes more like a Mongol horde that just keeps moving in all directions. Because some of them are just rolling through systems, stripping them of what they need, resources, slaves, magic, whatever, and then they're moving on to the next system. Well, some of them are trying to establish themselves as a government and try to become the thorn in the Dragon Republic side. Look, we're the legitimate government. You can't kick us out. And the Dragon Republic's like, well, I guess you are, aren't you? So now they're stuck with these little pockets of systems that are still under the control of evil dragons, but they're very much contained. And those dragons know it, but they're willing to live in that situation because that means they get to be a big fish in a little pond. Whereas the dragons that don't want that want to be out there and control systems of their own, are going out further and further and further. And of course, there's a possibility that there are other dragons and other species of a similar power level that could be encountered as well. So you can have all kinds of very dynamic structures out there on their fringes. Now, the Dragon Republic is not just going to sit back and let this happen without anything. So they come up with the Republic Rangers. Now, the Rangers' job is to discover planets, preferably discover planets and systems before the evil dragons do, and try to make a beachhead for the Republic, become the PR arm of the Republic. Also, become the part of the Republic that the leadership uses to go take care of stuff that maybe they want to not have to commit an entire army to. Stuff that maybe won't be written down quite as much as it would otherwise have been if it were a military campaign. So you end up with strike teams, which are perfect for player characters. So now you have these units which are part of the Republic, but they're very independent, and their purpose is to go out, take on a target, try to pull a target into the Empire, or neutralize a target that could potentially be something they don't want to fall into the hands of the evil dragons. Because sometimes the only thing you can do is deny your enemy of something that they want. And it's going to put them into a position where they're going to have to make some really tough moral calls. I'm reminded of Mass Effect in this way. I just finished watching my Gopher, which is one of the best guys on YouTube doing playthroughs, finished Mass Effect 2 for the first time, I believe. And he, destroys one of the relays, even though it kills an entire system, because that keeps the Reapers from getting to trillions of lives. It was a hard moral choice, but he made it because 300,000 dead is better than trillions. So those, and it probably will never be on that scale, at least not at the low levels of a campaign. Maybe when they get into like 15 plus, maybe at the higher levels, they can actually have things on that Mass Effect level. But that is what the player characters can be doing. But also, the Republican Rangers could be the great background for characters. So you could have people, some of whom are veterans of that campaign, of that service. Say you want to start your campaign, say at 3rd level. Which I think is a sweet spot. It's a good place to start a campaign. And if you do that, that's they're veterans. So now I'm pulling in kind of the traveler thing, where you have you've mustered out of the military, and you maybe have you've gotten a birthing privilege. So now you can get on board ships that go from place to place. You can't tell them where to go, but you can now be, hobos on those vessels because you are a veteran and you have that berthing privilege to get on board those vessels. Or maybe you mustered out and you had enough money to pool together and you get yourself your own vessel. So now you're doing the Firefly thing, where you're a small group on your own vessel trying to survive. Now, maybe you don't want to do out there on the edge of things. Maybe you don't want to be doing the things that the Rangers were doing because you're tired of that. Maybe you just want to make a living and be happy and enjoy things. Maybe you work for a patron who's some kind of biologist or xenobiologist fusing magic and technology and stuff, and needs people to go out there and find things for them, or discover things actually are as such as rumors have said they are. There's a lot of folklore out there. How much of that folklore is real? Suddenly your player characters are the research teams that go out there and try to find out what's going on in the universe. So that's how I would run a Spelljammer, or rather a Starjammer, or a Dragonstar campaign if I were to run one. It would be a much different structure. The metallic dragons are not dumb enough to ever try to play, we're going to trade off with the chromatic dragons. That's just a fool's errand. It is just absurd how anybody who came up with that idea for the Dragonstar campaign thought it was a good idea is just beyond me. Yes, I know, it creates instant conflict, so everybody's happy and lots of storylines, but you also have to realize it's a system being created by really smart, really wise metallic dragons, and they're smart enough and wise enough to see that that is a really bad system. So their system is better, being a constitutional monarchy with a representative government, with laws that people can live under and have a better life than they could under the classic feudal system that they may have had before, is going to be much better for everybody. And it does mean that the bad dragons aren't all gone, but they're out there on the fringes. And we can, while we may be paying catch up to some degree, we can send out teams ahead of them, hopefully, to get the systems, to warn them. This is what we are representing. Here's our pamphlet. Be aware that if the chromatic dragons get here, you're not going to get this deal. So that's what I would do for a Starjammer game. I remember not saying Spelljammer. For a Starjammer game. And I personally think that Starjammer does a better job of science fantasy, at least in my book, than Starfinder does, because Starfinder is both too similar and too different from Pathfinder for my taste. I don't understand why they decided to keep the narrative structure of Pathfinder so close, and this they're the same people, but for some reason they've forgotten their past. It makes no sense to me. Why didn't they just sever it and start a new system using the Starfinder system on its engine without having to worry about a connection to anything having to do with Pathfinder in the past? I don't get it. But also they've baked player currency into the system so hard there's no way to get it out, and I don't like player currency. I don't like heroic points and things like that. So Starjammer doesn't have that problem. It's closer to Pathfinder because it is Pathfinder. It's just Pathfinder in a science fantasy system, which is what I've always wanted out of Dragonstar and never got it, and now we do. So this is what I would do. This is an idea that's kicking around my head. I thought I'd throw it out there for you. So tell me, did you ever like Dragonstar? Have you looked at Starfinder or a Starjammer? And which do you prefer? Which flavor of Pathfinder versions or evolution is your vibe? And what kind of a governmental structure would you use in that kind of a high fantasy high science fantasy game that is being presented in both Starjammer and Starfinder?